The Cowboy James Storm. Will James Storm be making a full-time return to Impact Wrestling after his shock return to the promotion at Bound for Glory a couple of weeks ago? Now, Cowboy James Storm, of course, is woven into the fabric of Impact Wrestling and TNA due to his long-standing history with the company. Now, Storm returned during the Call Your Shot Gauntlet Battle Royal at Bound for Glory. He was one of the final four men into the match with Heath, Rhino and Sami Callihan. Now, obviously, Storm was eventually eliminated by Callihan, but it must be said that the Cowboy looked absolutely fantastic during the course of this match. He looks to be in the shape of his life. And, of course, there is a lot of discussion now because of that appearance. Is James Storm going to be headed to Impact Wrestling? Now, it's a bit murky when it comes to the status of James Storm right now as to who he's actually working for, where, if anywhere, is he tied down. Now, James Storm is currently one half of the NWA World Tag Team Champions in the National Wrestling Alliance. His partner is, of course, Eli Drake. But it must be said, how great was it to see James Storm back in an Impact Wrestling ring only a couple of weeks ago? I've mentioned it several times, and it still is the case here. These TNA originals just belong in Impact Wrestling. They're woven so much into the fabric of the company. They've got so much association, so much history with the company that it just feels right that they perform in an Impact ring in the Impact Zone under the Impact Wrestling banner. Now, he really has done it all, he being James Storm, with Impact Wrestling. Now, during his time with Impact, he's a former 7-time NWA World Tag Team Champion. He's a former TNA King of the Mountain Champion, a 1-time TNA World Heavyweight Champion, and also a 7-time TNA World Tag Team Champion. To put that into context, during his time with Impact Wrestling, James Storm has won the World Tag Team Championship with the company at that time on 14 separate occasions. That is absolutely insane. And you also have to think about the 2020 that James Storm has had right now. Obviously, this year has been crazy. So much has changed, postponed, cancelled due to the pandemic. But what a fascinating year James Storm has had. He starts off the year with the National Wrestling Alliance, which it looks like he's still under contract with, but he competes regularly on NWA Power on YouTube. He becomes one half of the NWA World Tag Team Champions. But then, during this time, around January, February, he was contacted by the WWE because the WWE wanted James Storm to make a surprise Royal Rumble appearance, but he couldn't make it. He couldn't make the appearance. He couldn't make the Royal Rumble because he was working an NWA show and actually didn't get their communication until too late. But that wasn't going to halt WWE's plans for him, because then plans were put in place by the WWE creative team, specifically Paul Heyman, for James Storm to make his WWE debut on the Raw brand on Monday Night Raw after WrestleMania this year. The contracts were signed, everything was ready to go. He was quite literally just counting down the days. In fact, James Storm was preparing so much for this upcoming WWE run that he was actually doing his own physicals, paying out of his own pocket for these physicals to ensure that he would pass WWE's rigorous testing policies. Now, reportedly at the time, former executive director of Monday Night Raw, Paul Heyman, was incredibly high on the Cowboy James Storm. He really wanted him to be part of the Monday Night Raw brand. And then what happens? Like everything this year, the pandemic happens. Things change, things get cancelled. Because of the pandemic, everything, when it came to WWE news signings and James Storm, got delayed. Everything got delayed, everything got put on hold. And then during a recent interview he did with Ryan Satin, when Ryan Satin was still with Pro Wrestling Sheet, he said that he actually had last spoken to WWE about coming in July, and since then he's heard nothing. So it would appear, and obviously with Cowboy James Storm's appearance at Bound for Glory a couple of weeks ago, and due to his comments and interviews that he's made, it looks like the deal is off when it comes to WWE. The deal is dead. And obviously that's due to the pandemic, but also you have to factor into that Paul Heyman, as I mentioned, former executive director of Monday Night Raw, because Paul Heyman is no longer in charge of the creative on Monday Night Raw. So now, a couple of weeks ago, he makes an appearance for Impact Wrestling. So it was awesome to see him back. The rumor mill, as always, whenever anyone makes a surprise appearance, goes back into overdrive. So was it a one-time deal? Was it full-time? I don't know. It's complex. It feels like when you see someone in WWE make a surprise appearance at the Royal Rumble, you then naturally have the discussion of, was it just for one night or are they coming back? Like when RVD, what was it, 2009, came back in the Royal Rumble, everyone thought, great, RVD's coming back, but it was a one-time deal. But then you've got people like MVP returns at the Royal Rumble earlier this year, and he's still on WWE TV now. So was it a one-time deal or was it full-time? I don't know. This one to me just feels very, very complex, because it certainly to me, when I was watching it at the time, certainly to me felt like more than just a cameo. James Storm doing a one-off appearance with a company that he has so much history with, I just don't think happens. I don't think, to me it would be strange if James Storm, with the history that he has with the company, like I said, he's a 14-time tag team champion during his time with Impact. He is a TNA original. He has so much history with the company, and he can still go, and he's still a big star in that arena. Just to do a one-off cameo, I just don't know if that happens. And he still very much does have ties with the NWA. As I mentioned, it looks like he's still under contract. He's still one half of the NWA World Tag Team Champions with Eli Drake. But you look at the National Wrestling Alliance, look at Billy Corgan, they've been very, very open about saying to talents, look, obviously we're not running NWA power tapings, the pandemic stopped that, take outside bookings because you're going to lose money. And that's been the case with lots of talent. And they've also said to talent, look, if you want your release from the contract, you'll get it. Eddie Kingston's a great example of that. He did an appearance for AEW, went well, he requested his release, he got it. So it's not out of the realm of possibility right now that James Storm could be coming back to Impact. And I hope he really does. Impact, to me, is his home. It's the place he's always going to be the most associated with. And look, that situation with WWE, it really does suck. And it's a shame. It's one of those various casualties of 2020 in the pro wrestling world because of obviously the pandemic. And I would have loved to have seen James Storm get his shot in WWE because he's never got it before. I would say though, you know, maybe it's a blessing because some of the Impact guys that have gone there haven't fared so well, but some have. You know, you've got AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, Bobby Roode. They're all on the main roster right now, and they're doing great in Impact. And even more modern Impact guys like Drew McIntyre. I know he was with WWE first, but he's a former Impact World Champion too. But I said this when Eric Young returned to Impact, and I'll say the same when it comes to James Storm. James Storm has spent the majority of his career with Impact Wrestling. He's best known for being in Impact Wrestling. There is so much history there when it comes to James Storm in Impact. Impact has all of that. They have all of that on tape. They have all of that footage. And again with Eric Young, I think about the promos they did about Eric Young prior to Bound for Glory. They showed the entirety of the evolution of Eric Young throughout his career. They showed him from, you know, Team Canada, comedy stuff, ODB, Serious, World Elite, to where he is now, former TNA World Heavyweight Champion. They showed it all, and it put together a great story and a great promo to show this is what Eric Young is. This is a guy that's associated with Impact, and they can do the exact same thing here with James Storm. And again, I think about all the stories that they could tell and they could do with all of that history and James Storm being so ingrained into the history of Impact Wrestling. And I've spoken about this a couple of times, and I think this is a good point to make when it comes to James Storm. Who is the top babyface in Impact Wrestling right now? Because it's difficult to say. It is difficult to say who is the top babyface. I don't think they have one. Yes, Rich Swann is the world champion, but they've kind of been cycling through a couple of world champions now to try and find who is that one guy that is going to be the peak of the company, the top babyface. Because Eddie Edwards for a hot second might have been it, Rich Swann now. But I think James Storm can be that guy. And yes, he might be a little beat up, and yes, he has miles on the clock, but he looks great. He's a name. And he's linked so intrinsically with Impact Wrestling. And I suppose when you look at the NWA situation right now, we know that NWA Power, there are plans for that program to return relatively soon. We don't officially know when. We don't know what form it will take. It was studio wrestling, and obviously they can still do that in the NWA, just without an audience. NWA is also having a relationship with that Primetime Live, UWN, on Fight TV. I don't think, off the top of my head, I'm not sure if James Storm has made an appearance there. He might have. I don't know. In terms of the current status of James Storm right now, I haven't heard if James Storm was at the Impact tapings post-Bound for Glory, but you could argue that given that he was at Bound for Glory and he performed, that indicates obviously that he passed all of the screenings, passed any virus checks, so he would have been cleared to perform at the tapings, and if he was in the area, he must have at least been backstage, right? So is there a possibility that he performed? I don't know. We haven't seen all of the TVs that have come out of that tapings. I think we've got maybe one more episode left, and who knows, James Storm might appear at the next tapings. He might appear at Turning Point. But we've also seen other names like Swoggle, who appeared at Bound for Glory in that Battle Royal. They've continued at the Impact taping, so why not James Storm? Now, on the flip side of things, we also did see Sean Daivari appear at Bound for Glory, and we haven't seen him post Bound for Glory on camera during these recent Impact tapings or Impact shows. But I must say that I did mention that I could possibly see him working behind the scenes as an agent or a producer. You have to consider that Daivari had that role with WWE previously before being let go earlier this year due to the budget cuts associated with the pandemic. So I don't know if that is the case, by the way, with Daivari, but I don't know. For me, it just, again, I mentioned it, I don't understand why James Storm would just do a cameo, because I think he's worth so much more to the company considering his history there. So what is the likelihood of James Storm returning to Impact full time? Well, obviously, I don't think he's going to go to WWE now. That possibility now looks over, unfortunately, due to the pandemic, due to Paul Heyman no longer being in charge of Raw's creative. And because Paul Heyman's no longer in charge of Raw's creative, you also have to look at who currently is in charge of the WWE creative for Raw and SmackDown, and that's Bruce Pritchard. Now, I know that Bruce Pritchard worked with James Storm during their time in Impact Wrestling back in the early, was it 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013. However, if you have listened to Bruce Pritchard's Something to Wrestle With podcasts, specifically the episodes he's done on Impact Wrestling, you'll hear that it always sticks out to me that Bruce Pritchard felt that James Storm was too inconsistent during his main event push there back in sort of 2012, 2011. So I'm not going to say that Bruce Pritchard isn't a fan of James Storm, but I don't think he is as big of a fan as Paul Heyman was of the Cowboy. So if he's not going to go to WWE, could James Storm go to AEW? I mean, he could. He absolutely could. And as I mentioned, he's a name. People know who he is. He's part of that NWA roster, and we've seen other NWA wrestlers go to AEW, whether it's Eddie Kingston, Ricky Starks, Thunder Rose has done appearances there. Allysin Kay is making her AEW debut at the weekend at AEW Full Gear. The NWA World Women's Championship is still a fixture on AEW programming. Serena Deeb is the current NWA World Women's Champion, and she's an AEW wrestler. So obviously there is a working relationship between AEW and the NWA. So again, as far as I know, James Storm is still under contract with the NWA. So while they do appear to have a relationship there, he absolutely could make maybe a one-off appearance for AEW. But I just think James Storm's his home is with Impact Wrestling. And like I've mentioned before, I just think that TNA originals like James Storm, their home is in Impact. And again, you have to remember, and this is so important to people that haven't watched Impact Wrestling for a while, you have to remember this isn't the Impact of 3, 4, 5 years ago. This is a completely different place now. There's different people in charge. They've got a decent TV deal, obviously not to the level of AEW or WWE or anything like that, but there's a lot of optimism around the product, from the fans, from the people in the industry. Impact is rebuilding the reputation that it lost over the years in the 2000s. There's a lot of buzz and momentum around the company, specifically in 2020. Since Slammiversary onwards, there's been a lot of positivity when talking about Impact Wrestling. And also, you're seeing former TNA guys go back to the company and excel. People like Eric Young, people like EC3 and Ken Shamrock. Eric Young's returned and he's better than ever. And he's been through the real bad time of TNA and Impact Wrestling in that sort of late 2000s, the end of the Dixie Carter era, Vince Russo, the Game of Thrones situation. Eric Young was there for all of that. And now he's back with the company, better than ever. And he seems happier than ever. He's been praising the locker room, the atmosphere, the direction of the company, the owners. So I think if James Storm does return, I truly think he can be a top babyface in the company. He can be the world champion. He can add a heck of a lot to the current roster, work with the younger guys, and prove to the WWE in reality what they missed out on here. Because remember, there's a lot of ex-WWE guys that are in Impact right now. They've got a big chip on their shoulder, and they want to show WWE that they messed up on releasing them. They missed the ball and having an opportunity and signing them to the company or releasing them or whatever. Currently in Impact, you have Eric Young, Heath, EC3, maybe not EC3 now, but Deonna Purrazzo and others. And they're all wrestling with a chip on their shoulder, say, you know what, you shouldn't have released me. You shouldn't have got rid of me. You couldn't find time for me on your programming? Are you kidding me? Look at the great work I'm doing in Impact right now. Not only I'm glad that I'm gone from the company, but I'll prove you all wrong. And I think When you look at James Storm, I know he isn't an ex-WWE guy, but it feels like almost that it's almost even worse because he didn't get his opportunity. He was robbed of his WWE opportunity. But if he came back to Impact, he could make a big splash and he could show WWE, you know what, regardless of the pandemic, you made a mistake here. You should have signed me anyway. So I think it's very, very interesting. Of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on James Storm possibly returning full-time to Impact Wrestling? Is that something you would like to see? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll be sure to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoyed chatting about Impact Wrestling with you guys here on the channel. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button as well. Really just help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.